Welcome to our Super Monday coverage of Union Budget 2016, what we are calling it, the tax booster. So many expectations from Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi yesterday in his Mann Ki Baat program probably captured the sentiments of the entire government in one line. He said it's an examination for him, and 125 crore Indian citizens are going to take his exams today. I'm sure he was talking in jest, but this is a big budget. Make no mistake, it's usually the third budget, the budget in the middle of any government's 5-year tenure, wherein a finance minister from the industry, from the MNCs, FIIs, on the tax front as well. Will the FM finally bite the bullet this time? Will he usher in the recommendations of the Income Tax Act Simplification Committee? Will he defer OM and GAR, which could be a huge sentiment booster for the foreign investors? Will he maybe take a strategic turn, and bring in at least a central GST, if not an integrated state and central GST? That will be a big strategic move, and tell a lot of stakeholders that even if states are not on board, we are here, we are committed to reforms, and we are going to go for GST. And of course, there is a question whether ICDs will also be deferred. That will make Yogesh Bhai very happy. He's been batting for that. He's never been happy with the ICDs. But to start off our budget coverage, we have special guests, our tax nostalgia contributors, PV Srinivasan, former head of tax at Wipro, and now a corporate advisor. Yogesh Kar, one of the foremost tax experts from Mumbai, partner with Bansi Mehta and Company, and my partner Amay Punte. I'll start with Amay. Amay, what are the quick expectations? What are the 4 or 5 things today that you're looking for from the budget?
Thanks, Arun. So you already listed down some of the key ones already. I think BEPS related proposals is the most important thing that a lot of corporates in India and consultants will be looking forward to. I won't go into the technicals, but just very interesting. Today is the February 29th leap year. It happens once in 4 years, and interestingly, Tax Sutra research team looked at past leap year budgets, and this is interestingly the 10th leap year budget to be presented. Morarji Desai was born on February 29th. He presented 2 budgets on his birthday. Just one interesting comment that Manmohan Singh made in the 1992 budget, which was presented on February 29th, that this budget represents a contribution to the successful implementation of this great national enterprise of building an India free from fear of war, want and exploitation, an India worthy of the dreams of the founding fathers of our republic. We shall pay any price, bear any burden, make any sacrifice to realize those dreams. India is on the move again. We shall make the future happen. I think even after 25 years, all of these words still are relevant in 2016 budget. Arun?
Absolutely. Previous, I think if you look at the economic survey, some of these sentiments, I may hang on for a few minutes. Previous, I think if you look at time tax to citizenship.
Giri, I'm losing your voice. I'm able to see you.
Yeah, previous, please go ahead. The economic survey document, I said, makes a strong emotional pitch and ties tax to citizenship, obligations of citizenship.
Let me size the expectations out of this budget. First, a positive. Leap year represented by 29th February. Let the signs be for a leap in the economy itself. Let the budget set the tone for a leap in the economy. There are enough evidences in the economic survey to suggest that India is better placed than the global economy, and we have many things going our way. Possibly the government will be looking at macroeconomics rather than microeconomics or tax policies, if I have to say. I look at this budget as an administrative reform rather than a policy setting. The policy setting, whatever has to happen, has already happened. We have to look only for administrative reform, which could be a few things I will speak as we go along. Essentially, I am looking at it as not a budget which will throw away new concepts altogether. All that we will see is some rationalization from time to time, past difficulties, whatever the tax assessees have encountered, both in direct and indirect taxes, they will be addressed through legislation rather than through circulars. So I think these are the things which I am looking at this budget. I don't see big bang proposals at all in taxation, not even a threshold exemption.
Cool. I think Anish too is joining in now. Yeah, we can see Anish here. Before we get to Anish, we'll go to Yogesh Bhai. Yogesh Bhai, what are your expectations from the budget? What are the 2 or 3 big things that you're looking forward from the finance minister? What should he do, and what do you do not want him to do?
Okay, we have been talking about startups and Stand Up India, Startup India, Stand Up India. So now, if you take this policy forward, certainly the objective is to have, to give a boost to entrepreneurship and job creation, etc. Now, let me first say what I don't want. That it's a good policy, but you obviously have to have some sort of a sunset clause when you talk of startup and stand up India. Because stand up India, you are saying that we will give boost to scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, women, etc. Now it is good to give them a boost because there's some sections of the society which have not been getting the equal privileges or equal opportunities, no doubt about it. But I strongly believe, very, very strongly believe, that there should be a sunset clause in the sense that you give them a hand holding for 5 years, 10 years, have a 10 years horizon, and then after that say that no, nothing going after that. Because ultimately, we as India we have to be looking at the not looking at the reserved status, but a deserved status. Now that's what I strongly believe. Now that is one aspect. So I don't want this to be eternal, because otherwise good deserving people will also turn themselves into reserved categories, which has happened in the past and which we don't want. Now what I want in this particular category is especially from the taxation side, that if you're talking of startups, you think of technocrats, and a technocrat would introduce his technology, and if he introduces his technology and he is allotted sweat equity by the company which is going to take that technology further, then I think there's a very good case to say that this sweat equity should not be taxed. Today, the sweat equity will be taxed based on the valuation of the technology and the sweat equity shares which a technocrat receives. So the tax in that case should really be deferred at the point of time when that person actually is going to sell the sweat equity shares. So this is one thing which I feel that when we're talking of startups and you have technocrats in mind, then I think this is something that the tax revenue can do, to boost this particular area. The other area again in the startups is probably when a startup, there's a concept of 3 or 4 years old concept. It's a very good, brilliant concept, but it doesn't have market. It doesn't have commercial sense, because you're talking of technocrats developing business and entrepreneurship. So there'll be someone who will be buying him off. There'll be some person who is going to make that idea into a commercial success. Now, when that person is bought over, he will be bought over by way of either cash deal or a share deal. If it's a cash deal, then the gentleman is actually encashing his technology, in which case, no doubt there should be tax. But if it's a share deal, and that company is going to remain as part of the company and going to take that company forward, then that should be exempt from tax. That's what I feel. That if a person of commerce is going to buy a person of science, so that and that is going to be a share deal, and he's not going to get anything in terms of cash today, then there should be some sort of a tax exemption at that point of time. And at the same time, for the buyer, who buys his technology should be able to depreciate that IPR over a period of time as an intangible asset. So these are the things from the point of view of the startup.
Okay. So Yogesh, we will come back to some of the specific proposals, in a while. I think he's really set the stage for what should we expect from the startup point. Anish, what do we expect from an FII standpoint? What do foreign investors, what do your clients want to hear from the finance minister today?
I think, Arun, one thing that the foreign investors want to hear is rationalization of the fund manager provisions. last year there was a proposal and there was an enactment of Section 9A, where a fund manager located in India would not be deemed to be a permanent establishment of a foreign investor. The conditions that are specified in that section are so onerous that it's been a year and you've not seen a single fund manager actually come down to India. And I can see Yogesh by smiling, so I think yes, he agrees with me. But I would think that rationalization of those and further liberalization of those would be the greatest booster that foreign investors would probably have. Another thing could be that there is today a differential in tax rate between capital gains, long-term capital gains on listed and unlisted, and that's probably because the definition of security somewhere seems to exclude private limited companies, and therefore if that gets rationalized, then those are, I think, the two things that foreign investors are clearly very keenly looking forward to. The third one, of course, is the last nail in the coffin from a MAT perspective, with the enactment very clearly saying that MAT will not apply to a foreign investor as the government has already committed. So I think these are the three key things that somebody is looking forward to. What they're clearly not looking forward to is any kind of tax on capital gains or increase in the long-term capital gains from capital gains holding period from 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, you look at the ET today, and when you look at it, you are seeing how many Oscars will the FM win, and one of the prominent ones, Anish, is capital gain on shares. So hold breath. We don't know what the FM is going to say. But Amay, if you look at what what the Prime Minister indicated a few weeks ago at a private gathering of businessmen, saying that enough of just asking for tax breaks, and it almost mocked them for trying to belittle the tax subsidies that go to the not so well off. On that background, and the finance minister also trying to, what we call put a trial balloon on the long-term capital gains, it looks like that could be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Two specific points, Arun. One is that last year, when the finance minister and the finance ministry began consultations for reducing the corporate tax rate over 4 years, they have very clearly laid down that the exemptions will also go away. Coupled with that, the economic survey report very explicitly at number of places talks about the real beneficiaries of the tax incentives, and they are really the wealthy and the richer people, and perhaps corporates. I think corporates too have been saying that rationalize and bring moderate tax rates, perhaps a lesser exemption which is saddled with plenty of litigation which goes on for 15 years, I think will be a much better tax booster that one can look for in today's budget.
Yeah, previous, I want to read out this line from the economic survey. It talks of the average income in the 30% threshold as being 27.7 lakh rupees, and these earners are roughly 25 lakh in number, 1.1% of all taxpayers, and placed in the top 5.5% of overall Indian income distribution. And then it comes up with even more data on how the income distribution is skewed towards the top, and finally says these numbers are striking and have one policy implication. Any tax incentives that are given, for example, for savings, benefit not the middle class, not the upper middle class, but the super rich, who represent the top 1 to 2% of the Indian income distribution. Now, by its definition, it is true that top taxpayers will be beneficiaries of tax incentives. However, in most countries, they will range from being middle class to very rich. In India, however, they are the super rich. Previous, if the finance minister were to act on this, I can bet that you, Anish, and Yogesh Bhai will be paying a lot more tax this year.
No, that is not the grudge at all. We'll be too happy to contribute to the national cause. The grudging point is that if you have to identify the super rich, then you have to identify the source of income of the super rich also, and that should be the one which should be liable to tax. The source of the super rich possibly is the long-term capital gain on the stock exchanges, and possibly the dividend income which is received at a concessional rate, I may say, because the corporate distribution tax is not equal to the tax rate which the individuals would suffer had the income been taxed in their hands. So I think the concession is received in this form, or the subsidies are received in this form, if a correction is required, not to possibly curb the savings of the rich, possibly it should be to enhance the tax on the income they earn. I think that should be the driver, because savings, whatever be the source, whether let it come from the ordinary, the middle class, the low income, or the super rich, they all contribute to the economy in a different way. It is the income which is not getting taxed. I think that should be the target. And if the focus is on taxing income, I think these are the avenues which are available to the finance minister. But I'm very sure these are not the avenues he's going to touch this financial year.
Yogesh bhai, let me take that a step further. The economic survey is also makes a strong case for reviewing the tax breaks or incentives on savings, and it says that we need to tax them either at the point of contribution or at the time of withdrawal, what the Kelkar committee once referred to as the EET. Somehow 10 years have gone by, but we haven't seen too many of those Kelkar committee recommendations come by. We again have an Income Tax Act Simplification Committee of Justice Ishwar, and many of those recommendations have been welcomed by the industry. But the question is, the Kelkar committee, I think, was one committee which really went out on one limb, made some of the boldest recommendations that we've seen when it comes to tax reforms. But we haven't seen any government walk the talk on them.
Yeah, that's probably because they want to be populist. That's the whole thing, you know. Because if you talk about removing PPF exemption, then one and all is affected. So the finance minister really wouldn't like affect the pockets of every small investor. So, although from a macroeconomic point of view, that may be a big picture and a big recommendation, but you need a really bold finance minister to take that step. And if coupled with increase of your tax exemption limits, if it's coupled with that, then probably the pinch could be lower. But otherwise, I agree with you that you don't see these recommendations coming up, because then you'll not be becoming more popular. That's
Yogesh bhai, we've had so many such committees in the past.
Yeah.
Which committee report do you remember with a lot of fondness, and which you think was really bold and set out a path which we ought to have followed, or maybe some of the finance ministers would have followed? We've had the Shom committee, we've had Justice Ishwar committee, now the Kelkar committee. Many committees before I think Amay and I were born in 1981. Which committee? Which are the couple of committee reports, Yogesh bhai, that you remember? Even today.
Yeah, something very bold. I mean, which Mr. Ishwar committee has recommended right now is the removal of 49 so far as relates to dividend, and that's, I think, something which I think it should happen. Because then there's a case of removal of double taxation, because things like dividend and units are not something which are completely tax free. The taxes have been paid not by the shareholder or the unit holder, but by the company, and that recommendation is something which is of Mr. Ishwar, I think is very, very good, very bold, but I don't know whether it will really happen or not. And again, coming to Ishwar committee, he has recommended deferment of ICDs. You referred to ICDs also, and I think that's also a very, very welcome proposition from Mr. Ishwar. But what I understand that's not likely to happen, because of the Ind AS getting implemented. And if Ind AS is getting implemented this year, the rationale for the CBDT seems to be that some companies are going to implement Ind AS, some companies are not going to implement Ind AS. So therefore, we don't have a common base for the purposes of calculation of profit. Therefore, we want ICDs this year. That's what the rationale seems to be. So that is on Ishwar committee. So far as the past committees are concerned, yes, I think Vijay Kelkar's committee was one of the very much discussed report, and I think the liberalization of 2000, those restructuring that we saw, the provisions which made the restructuring tax neutral, etc., that we saw in 2000 were I think the suggestions which came from those committees. Uh, I think that's what I have to say on this.
Yeah. Amit, couple of points that Yogesh said. I think he has a breaking. He has some insights that I think the viewers would be interested in. No deferral of ICDs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually, I mean, Ishwar committee has very explicitly recommended, and many taxpayers have been struggling with some of the issues. One, of course, finance minister's perspective is interesting, but anyway, you have tax provisions where wherever there is a conflict with the accounting standard treatment, then provisions of the Act prevail, and in that sense, you have a common base of the Income Tax Act itself to compute your taxable income, and you don't need ICDs. In fact, Arun, one interesting point is that the effective corporate tax rate in India is 23%. You already have a MAT which is at 18 and effectively going up to 20%. So anyway, MAT is calculated on your accounting profits or on book profits without any significant adjustments. So what ICDS is going to effectively achieve is there going to be a significant additional revenue for the government vis-a-vis the effort that the officers and the industry are going to put. To me, the cost-benefit analysis may not properly work out, and therefore, I mean, it will be a big disappointment if ICDS effort doesn't happen. But I think in a few hours we'll get to know what's about ICDS. Though ICDS can be deferred through a notification, and we don't need a budget amendment because the notification it was a separate notification which provided the date of post April 20.
Highly unlikely. If the finance minister does not announce it in the budget, then we'll see a deferral later. If it has to happen, it will surely happen with the finance minister announcing it. Anish, on POEM, this affects a lot of foreign investors, a lot of clients that you deal with. What is the expectation on POEM?
On POEM, I think they issued a draft guideline, which has again been debated and discussed, and certain rationalizations in terms of how the POEM guidelines will be implemented and applied. Because POEM as a concept really is, if you see, a tiebreaker test. It's not necessarily a primary test of residence. Right? From a perspective of, if there is a company which is incorporated in a particular country, generally the world over it is recognized as being resident in that particular country. Now, when you look at the test of control and management and key strategic and commercial decisions, that should really be more of a tie-breaking issue rather than a primary residence issue. I don't think the government is going to take, defer the applicability of POEM as was probably contemplated or speculated by some newspapers in terms of what I heard. But yes, certainly a more example-oriented guideline, a more specific instance-oriented guideline in terms of when POEM should be regarded to be in India and in what circumstances not, would be helpful. Again, I don't know whether it is going to come as part of the budget because any guideline will be separate and independent of the budget. The draft guideline was also independent of the budget making exercise. So I would think that, but even if in the speech or I think when the finance minister actually kind of presents the budget, if there is an indication to say that yes, we're re-looking at POEM and we will give more prescriptive guidance in terms of when POEM is to be applied, I think that would be a very, very big positive trend.
Yeah, yes, Yogesh bhai says no ICDS deferral. Anish is saying no POEM deferral. I'm sure you have a little more good news on the GAR front.
GAR also, I don't see a deferral. There is no need to address GAR this year at least. So we don't have to jump the gun. Particularly, we do not know what actions the government is going to take on the BEPS action plan. So possibly these are linked, and that's how the budget speech was made in the initial year. I would think the GAR deferment and the BEPS action plans will be synchronized, and that will be. It will also augur well because both have similar content, and you do not need two separate legislation to attack the same issue. But nevertheless, I must say, the Black Money Act, which was initiated, sometime during the year, did not raise enough of revenues for the government. One way to think that it was not intended to raise revenue, but it was intended to be a deterrent. I do not know whether it has acted as a deterrent also. What are the actions the government will take to possibly reduce the circulation of cash and possibly enhance the use of credit or banking channels? I think those will be initiatives which I look forward from this budget, where there's a mandate to use more and more of credit and banking channels rather than to use cash. So I would look forward to those initiatives rather than address GAR, because once you address black money, GAR also gets in a way addressed, because much of the GAR is to circulate the black money, if I may have to say, because you have to transact with foreign companies, then you engineer structures to bring back money in our form which is tax-free. Possibly the core of the problem lies in addressing the black money.
I think previous has made a very important point. But I think you must look at an article of all our viewers written by Mr. R. Jagannathan, former editor of First Post, very senior journalist, and now who's the editor of a right-wing magazine called Swarajya. He wrote an article a couple of days ago, a headline that how the government is paying a price for stopping corruption and cronyism, and he alluded, if I recollect correctly, to the Black Money Act. That actually the government is paying a price, it is sacrificing a little bit of growth by attacking corruption and cronyism. A very interesting insight. And the Black Money Act, while it may not have yielded revenue, is exactly doing what you suspected to do, previous sir, is that it seems to have put a little bit of brake on the cronyism and corruption, at least at the top end. That's the argument that Mr. Jagannathan, popularly known as Jaggi, has made in that article. So maybe it's made an effective deterrent.
It's a good public policy. It's a good public policy. It may have a little impact on the economy for the immediate term, but in the long term, it will benefit all of us.
Right. Arun, just one very interesting point over here. With the BEPS and automatic exchange of information related initiatives happening world over, interestingly, a few months ago, OECD came home with statistics, and not just India, there are several other countries which are implementing schemes which are equivalent to, wherein the foreign account information or foreign income to be brought back to the local country and the taxes be paid. So that's very interesting. South African finance minister in the budget that was presented last week did again mention equivalent legislation being implemented in South Africa. So I think in next 12 months, again, globally also, effort is happening on implementing a law equivalent to a undisclosed income declaration. So,
Yogesh, any thoughts? I think Amay has mentioned BEPS. I'm sure PVS sir, it's one of PVS sir's pet topics. I'll come to him in a minute. But any thoughts on what the government might do, what the finance minister might do with regard to CBC reporting? I think, and that is one of the first action plans that is surely going to get implemented. Many countries are already implementing it, as Amay said.
Yeah, I would feel that the equivalent of BEPS Section Plan 13, which talks about transfer pricing reports being available not only to your own country, but not only to your own country government, but also to the government of all related parties. I think that's something which I would feel is bound to happen this year, because that Action Plan 13, everyone has agreed that it will be effective from 1st January 2016, or for all years commencing from 1st January 2016. And therefore, I would feel that India will adopt that and have some regulations requirement of reporting. Now, if once these requirement of reporting are there in place, thereafter, the data is getting collected, and after that, what regulations are brought about is something which one will have to see in a year or two. But I think those reporting requirements, I personally feel that equivalent of BEPS Action Plan 13, India will probably implement this year in this budget. That's what I expect will happen.
Yogesh, I want to pick your thoughts on one thing that is surely going to happen. The finance minister has already announced a roadmap of moving from 30% to 25% corporate tax rate, and simultaneously quite a few exemptions will have to go. Let's look at the exemptions that are likely to go. They also say, set out a draft roadmap for that, or they set out the first draft of which are the exemptions that should go right away. You had the weighted R&D. You had, I think, depreciation that was mentioned. So, Yogesh bhai, which are the exemptions that you are expecting will go this time?
See, all these tax holidays are something which may have a sunset and which may go wherever the tax holidays are still there. But insofar as R&D is concerned, I think it should not go. It should be kept. What has happened for so many years is there is an implementation issue on these R&D expenses and allowances, because there have been litigations in almost all cases. There have been delays in getting these approvals from the relevant authorities. And you have lots and lots of litigation where you have approvals from the scientists, but you don't have the approvals in the prescribed form, etc., etc., and the matters get into unnecessary litigation. Now, the implementation of that has been poor. That has to be improved. And R&D, obviously, when you're talking of digital India, when you're talking of technical technocrats and startups, etc., R&D is not something which you should stop at this point of time. But yes, the tax holidays will go. You might get into some tax exemptions, if not profit-linked incentives, but investment-linked incentives for startups, because that is what you might get to see. But I don't think that should be for a very long period.
Yeah.
It should not be for 10-year tax holiday sort of thing, because as I said, you are small today, and you are incentivized to always remain small in future. So that's what not should. It's something which should not happen. And but otherwise, profit-linked incentive may gradually go. That's what I feel.
Anish, nostalgia is something that was really sent us back into the memory lane. You listed out 5 memorable finance bills, and let me try to recollect them. I don't have the paper in front of me. You said 1965, I think 1967, 1985, I think 1997 and 2012. Am I right, Anish?
That's right.
Yeah. So Anish, talk for a couple of minutes on each.
Most remembered, Arun, not memorable in that sense, because all the other 4 may be very, very taxpayer friendly, but the 2012 budget, frankly, would be remembered for what the government probably shouldn't have done, rather than what it should have done, right? And the knee-jerk reaction to the Vodafone Supreme Court decision, and also the amendment of royalty with retrospective effect, was something I think that the government shouldn't have done. But if really there is a budget which was probably talked about, the most by people, at least in the last decade, I think it must be this budget, where whether it was in India or outside, I think people just raised voices of anguish. To say that the government ought not to have done this. But I think those budgets which were there in and what we chose with a lot of difficulty. Some of them were very, very structural in nature. I think they went to contributing to what the Income Tax Act actually looks like today. For example, all the artificial disallowances that Mr. Chidambaram removed in '97. The shift towards transaction-based taxes, BDT, if you remember, was actually in that big budget. And all of those things really contribute to what the tax is today. If I go back to '85, the tax rates beyond before that were really, really high, and it was a bold step to say by Mr. VP Singh, say that let me at least reduce the tax rate such that people will probably start complying. So yes, from that perspective, one would believe that some of these budgets really are noteworthy in that sense, and one hopes that probably this budget, where at least from a direction perspective and a policy perspective, can probably get at least there's the opportunity to make it memorable. Let's see what the finance minister does.
Yes, the GST, can we let you go without talking about the GST? Right-wing thinkers are making this point, and Mr. Jagannathan has made this point very forcefully, that the government, he calls GST as the sunk cost fallacy of this government. Whereas whereby it is investing a lot on GST, and we the stakeholders, all of us, are making too much out of the GST, and which is not going to yield such commensurate benefits. And therefore he says, take a step back, go for central GST and chuck the state GST. Whichever states want to come on board can come on board. The rest can go take a hike, and let's go and implement the central GST. Sir, A, do you advocate that that as a step that the FM ought to take? That will be a big bold step to go alone. Number two, will it work?
In fact, I would like only a central GST. The way the GST design has been proposed, I think it doesn't augur well for a country like ours, which is a federal system. For example, there is not much thought on how services will be taxed under the GST. I see more problems than solutions under the GST design, because you cannot have 29 jurisdictions taxing services, and where valuation will become so critical that it is going to possibly impair the transactions in services. So I am slightly apprehensive with the design of the GST itself. I'm happy that's not getting implemented too soon, and there should be public deliberation on the efficacy of the GST before it gets actually implemented. Now, having said that, I will look forward to a central GST, because that possibly gives a signal to the stakeholders that as long as you are paying tax under one law, it will be available for set off against another law, and there is no distinction between the taxation regimes under the indirect tax. I think that signaling will be very strong signaling, and it will be a step in the direction of GST. Whenever it evolves, possibly we can have a consensus as to how to merge the central taxes and the state taxes into a unified GST. It may not happen in the near future, but at least we would have tested the concept under central GST, and the efficacy of the concept will be known. I am very sure it will not result in a substantial decline in revenue, because today we have got rates of taxes for both services and goods at more or less the same level, and possibly it will head towards a commonality of 17–18%. So in my view, testing the concept with a central GST will be a bold move. It will signal to everybody, all the stakeholders, that the government is serious about implementing GST, and it will do everything possible under its command to have the GST on board.
Comment on the administrative front, before I go to Yogesh Bhai, the Shom committee made a lot of, again, bold recommendations with far-reaching consequences on the administrative front. For example, you had, one of the recommendations being that merge the CBC and CBPB, from a functional point of view. You had the fact that the AO should not be a target-driven system, and many such recommendations of the Shom committee on the administrative front. On some of which the government has already started moving through the circulars. So they're trying to move. Anything big that the government, you think the finance minister can do through the finance bill today, or you think it's likely to come more through these circulars?
I think again you perhaps won't need legislative amendment for all of them. Of course, some of the suggestions are really.
But just announcing the intent. The budget is more to announce the intent.
Right. So I think on that side, full credit to the government for actually not just committing to the intent, but also implementing certain things. For example, a month ago, we have a new tax policy committee which has been set up, which not just includes the revenue officers, but also the economists, and a tax policy is something which has not been talked so much about in India.
Tax policy council.
A tax policy council. So I think in terms of the intent, though TARC report was a brainchild of the earlier government and earlier finance minister, I think wherever possible, even through, for example, cadre restructuring, certain things from the TARC were considered, etc. So to me, the government is already acting upon it, and perhaps budget is not necessarily the occasion, though of course they have been again and again very clearly saying that we want to promote a non-adversarial tax regime. I think perhaps if that gets again reiterated, I think that will be reassuring.
Yogesh Bhai, the proof of the pudding is in the collections, some would say. look at the collections. The income tax collections are falling short by 40,000 crores, and he's having to make that up by raising excise duty once every fortnight or a month on petrol. So the very fact that the income tax collections are down goes to show that the government is serious about ushering in a non-adversarial regime. Yogesh bhai, would you buy that or not?
No, that's true. I mean, the steps will have to be taken, to prove the point, and especially when you're talking of, say, for example, you're talking of digital India, then carry it forward to the income tax as well, carry it forward to all indirect tax as well. Yes, you have issued circulars to say that you file your returns, you file even your appeals electronically, things like that. But take it forward to say that you will have hearings also, by way of video conferences. You submit your details electronically. There's no need for the tax department. I mean, there's no need for you to visit the tax department, submit your papers electronically. So the idea is, if you reduce the human interface, have that sort of digital development in our implementation of the tax laws, automatically those and if you record those video conferences, video hearings, then the adversarial approach will automatically go away. That's so take this forward in terms of administering the tax laws, and implement these things faster, because that would help resolving issues on corruption, that will help all these allegations of the department being adversarial, etc., etc.
Just to add to what you said, Yogesh bhai, I think, this government, at least in the past year or so, has issued a lot of circulars to notifications which take away some of the irritants that we were otherwise facing as professionals, right? For example, the initial assessment here, or the penalty on MAT, or the 43B on the employee contribution, etc. So all of these things, I think, signal a very positive trend as far as the government is concerned.
No, that's right.
Yeah, Yogesh bhai, I was actually asking when the connection was lost. The very fact that the income tax collections are not going to meet the targets, they're going to be down quite significantly by 40,000 crores. Doesn't it mean that the government actually is going slow when it comes to?
I can't hear you.
Yeah, Yogesh bhai, I said that. Can you hear me now, Yogesh bhai?
Yeah. Tell me.
Yogesh bhai, I was asking, the very fact that the income tax collections are down, they're not going to meet the targets, will fall short by around 40-50,000 crore rupees. Doesn't it mean that the government is actually walking the talk when it comes to, going slow on aggressive tax assessments and actually ushering in a non-adversarial tax regime?
Yeah, maybe, as Anish said, that they have brought about these circulars to clarify their positions. They are doing that. But at the same time, actual implementation at the tax department, when you face the tax officers, you don't find that happening so much. The person who goes and appears on a day-to-day basis is the person who really faces the heat of what's happening there. So it's the approach of the officers that needs to change. At the policy level, yes, we do see a lot of signals of bringing about the change, as what Anish just explained. Uh, uh, so maybe not, but at the ground level, things should change, really speaking. At the ground level, we don't see things changing so fast.
Yes, the mindsets, I think, Yogesh bhai, still remain the same, which is absolutely true. The challenges that we face when we go and appear, are still probably the same as we would have, or probably would have increased, as compared to 5 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yogesh bhai, we lost you in the last 30 seconds. If you could please just, just summarize what you said.
Yes, I'll just summarize that. At the policy level, yes, there are signals, as Anish had explained, given some examples, that there are signals of agreeing to the correct views, or the legally correct views, and not taking an adversarial approach. But at the ground level, at the assessing officer level and the commissioner of each level, when you and I appear, and we find that we don't find much change at that level. At that level, they will do what they want to do, because we will still hear them saying that our hands are tied. We understand your problems, but we can't do much about it, and we have instructions from the top. Those sort of things we still hear today, day in and day out. And that's what needs to go. You know. So adversarial approach at the policy level, yes, maybe there are some signals, but at the ground level, a lot needs to be done.
Perfect. Final word from all our three tax nostalgia contributors, starting with Anish. Anish, final word from you.
I think I'm quite looking forward to what is going to happen today. I would think that this is the greatest opportunity that the FM has to lay down the policy for the next few years. Maybe the amendments may not be so much in terms of the fine print, but I think the policy should clearly be to have a regime of reasonable taxes coupled with very strict enforcement.
PVS, sir?
I expect five things to happen. One, merger of cessors into the tax itself. This is what was done in indirect tax space last year. Possibly expect that to happen in the direct tax spaces also. So you have an effective tax at 34. Then finally the tax itself will become 34, and it may be signaled to be a lower by saying reduce 1% from the corporate tax rate. Which may take effect not immediately, but certainly from the next financial year, because the incentives are also proposed to be withdrawn from 2017. I expect the administrative reforms. I find that the interest rates and the penalties are quite stiff. The interest rate is very stiff under the service tax compared to the income tax. You will see some rationalization of interest rates under the service tax regime. And the penalties under the income tax are stiffer compared to the indirect taxes. You may find that the penalties under the direct taxes reduced. You may find some provisions amended with regarding to 234E. I expect substantial provisions with regarding to startup to give a policy flip to the environment of entrepreneurship which the government wants to create rather than employment. So I would see a lot of provisions encouraging that. I would possibly look at OM deferred will be a good sign, because it has already kicked in, it's already in force, and we have already spent almost the whole of the year without proper guideline. So at least the year deferment will be in serving the equity and justice of most people who organize the business without having regard to the guideline. So at least a year of deferment will serve that purpose.
Yeah, Yogesh bhai?
Well, I think this budget should address the issues of non-performing assets by the banks and financial institutions. And in terms of some tax issues concerning dealing with NPAs, one may think of enabling the promoters in the companies who are into your SDRs or CDRs packages to provide them some sort of a tax capital gains tax exemption. If these packages are wanting them to dispose of their surplus assets so as to pay the banks and make the money free for the banks and financial institutions. Also, in terms of NPAs, if there are waiver of loans or waiver of interest, then exempt these entities from 41(1) taxation, or extend the period of carry forward of losses and things like that. Now, these are not something which is new, because we do have these provisions for under the SICA for for BIFR packages. Now, if we can broad base that and apply it to the infrastructure sector or other sectors where we have NPA problem, steel sector where we have NPA problem. Of course, you ought to have some deterrence that a person or a company does not misuse these sort of tax advantages. But if you inbuilt those deterrence or inbuilt those points there, I think as a matter of tax amendments, addressing NPAs, these sort of amendments, I think should find place in this budget.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anish, PVS, Yogesh bhai. It's going to be a very exciting day forward. We are going to be right a half an hour. Yes, our coverage today is being powered by Orange. Let me take 15 seconds to talk about it. Amay is here. It's a product with all the historical databases. It's the first tax sutra product with historical database and also an income tax commentary, Chaturvedi and Pitisaria, both rolled into one product for the first time in India. So our coverage today is being powered by Orange. Be tuned in to Budget 2016, the tax booster. Super Monday is here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will.